The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room, but it felt like a distant echo in the growing storm inside me. I stood there, frozen, the weight of the envelope in my wife's hands seeming to grow heavier with every passing second. She had just returned from work, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floor, her usual smile playing at the corners of her lips as she set her bag down on the counter. But today, everything was different. I had always trusted her, never once questioning her actions or words. We had built this life together, brick by brick. Our home, our plans for the future. Each promise was a part of the world I thought we had created. But now, as I watched her carefully unfold the envelope, it felt like the ground beneath me was slipping away. $30,000. I had read the numbers over and over, not quite able to process them. The cold figures in front of me didn't make sense. Where had she gotten this money? Why hadn't she told me about it? My heart pounded in my chest, drowning out the noise around me. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself, but my vision blurred as my mind raced. This can't be happening, I thought. She wouldn't keep something like this from me. But the silence that followed, the way she wouldn't meet my eyes, the tremor in her hands as she tucked the envelope back into her bag, told me everything I needed to know. She was hiding something, and that something had just been laid bare between us. Why didn't you tell me? My voice barely rose above a whisper, but it carried with it the weight of 100 unasked questions. Her gaze flickered to the floor, and I saw her take a shaky breath. But she didn't answer right away. Instead, her eyes seemed to avoid mine, darting away as if she were trying to make the truth disappear. The air in the room grew thicker, colder, until I felt as if I couldn't breathe. The tension between us was unbearable. Every passing second felt like an eternity. My hands were shaking now, despite my efforts to control them. I could feel the raw ache in my chest. This wasn't just about money. It was about trust. About her belief that she could hide something so significant from me for so long. How long had she been keeping this secret? What else was she hiding? I watched her try to speak, but the words seemed to catch in her throat, as if the truth was too much for her to admit. In that moment, I realized something that shook me to my core. I didn't know who she really was anymore. The tears came before I could stop them. Not because of the money. Not yet, anyway, but because of the overwhelming sense of betrayal. Why hadn't she trusted me with this? It wasn't just about the money. It was the silence, the secrecy, the unspoken distance that had crept between us without my even realizing it. And in the quiet of that moment, as I looked at the woman I thought I knew, I understood one undeniable truth. Our marriage would never be the same again. The room seemed to close in on me. The sound of my own heartbeat was deafening. I could barely hear the words coming from her lips. Her voice, though shaky, still tried to explain, tried to smooth over the cracks in her story. But every word she spoke felt like a hammer pounding the last nails into the coffin of my trust. I wasn't hiding it from you, she said, her hands wringing together. Her voice cracked as if she, too, could sense the gravity of what she was saying. I didn't want you to worry about it, about us. I've been saving it for our future, for emergencies, things we might need down the line. You're always so stressed, and I didn't want to add to that. But as her explanation faltered in the air, all I could think was, what kind of future are you planning without me in it? My mind reeled, my body paralyzed, as the pieces of this new reality fell into place. $30, 000, saved up $4. The very idea mocked me. My breath hitched as her words replayed in my head. Our future, for emergencies. There was no way I could swallow that. How had she been so calm all this time, knowing she was keeping this secret? How had she smiled at me across the dinner table, kissed me goodnight, held my hand, knowing that for months, or maybe even longer, this was hanging between us like an unspoken truth? How had she been able to live with that weight while I went on, trusting her as my partner, my equal? I couldn't look at her. I couldn't face her. The betrayal was so deep it felt like a wound I hadn't even known existed, suddenly torn wide open. I stood there, staring at the floor, the tension between us unbearable. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, but my voice was caught in my throat. You lied to me, I whispered, the words tasting bitter. My voice broke on the last word, and I felt a tear slip down my cheek, but I didn't care anymore. I let it fall. You lied to me for 2 years. Her face crumpled at that, the guilt and panic rising like a tide. I saw her instinctively step forward, reaching out as if to comfort me, but I took a sharp step back, shaking my head. No, Don't touch me." She stopped in her tracks, her hand hovering in the air, as if unsure of whether I was still the man she knew or someone else entirely. She opened her mouth, her voice desperate. "Please, don't." But I couldn't hear her anymore. I couldn't listen to the excuses, the explanations. Nothing she said could fix the reality I was facing. Nothing she could offer could erase the raw ache in my chest. She had made the choice to keep this from me, to hide it, and now I was left to deal with the aftermath of that decision. I could feel the sting of humiliation. She had seen me as naive, too trusting, maybe. She thought I would never question her, never dig deeper. And now, I was left standing in a house that no longer felt like home, with a woman who no longer felt like the partner I had built my life with. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice now pleading, as if the truth she was offering might somehow undo the damage she had done. "I didn't want to burden you. You've been under so much pressure. I was trying to make sure we were okay, without adding to your stress." Make sure we were okay? Was this really about me? Or was this about her? The more she spoke, the more I realized that this wasn't just about money. This was about control, about her perception of me, about her belief that she knew better than I did. She hadn't just hidden money. She had hidden herself, her thoughts, her plans from me. The reality of the situation started to settle in. I was standing before a woman who had carefully and deliberately constructed a version of our life that didn't include me in the decisions that mattered most. I wasn't part of her plans anymore. I was just the man who didn't ask the right questions, the man who trusted too easily. My mind started to spiral. What else had she hidden? What other decisions had she made without me? The questions kept piling up, each one more painful than the last. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I knew this wasn't the time for a confrontation. There was too much to unpack, too much to process. I felt small, humiliated. How had I let this happen? How had I not seen the signs? She had been playing me, and I had been too blind, too trusting to see it. The truth was staring me in the face, but I wasn't ready to face it just yet. I turned away from her, my body stiff with the weight of everything unsaid. "I need space," I muttered, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. But I didn't wait for her response. I walked out of the room, needing to get away, needing time to breathe. I couldn't stay here anymore, not when the walls between us were now insurmountable. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was foundational. Our marriage, the trust one had placed in her, was built on lies. And now, I didn't know if I could ever rebuild it. As I walked out of the house, I felt the sting of the cold air cut through me. The world outside was moving, as if nothing had changed, but everything inside me had shifted. And I knew then, with absolute certainty, that nothing would ever be the same. It had been days since the confrontation. The house felt different now, colder, quieter. Every corner seemed to carry a weight, an unbearable silence. But I refused to let it consume me. I couldn't. I had been through too much in my life to allow one betrayal to destroy everything. I wasn't the man I was yesterday. The emotional wreck I had been when I first discovered the truth had been replaced with a new version of myself, one I hadn't seen in years. A version that wasn't ready to crumble under pressure, but one who was about to find his strength in ways I hadn't anticipated. I walked around the house like a man in a fog, mind racing, but it wasn't panic that clouded my thoughts now. It was clarity, a clarity I hadn't had before. I didn't have a great wealth of material possessions. Nothing in my life had ever been easy or handed to me. But what I did have was an understanding of human nature, honed through years of navigating difficult situations. I had built businesses from the ground up, faced hardships that would break others, and I had always come out on top. My success wasn't measured by money. It was about my ability to endure. And this moment, was no different. As I sat in my study late that night, a sense of calm began to settle over me. I wasn't going to let the secrets she had kept tear me apart. I couldn't afford to let my emotions rule me anymore. My mind worked like a machine, processing every detail of our life together, every small inconsistency, every moment that had seemed out of place before. I wasn't just reacting to what had happened. I was planning what would happen next. I opened my old journal, the one I used to keep when I first started my business. Writing had always been an outlet for me, a way to think through problems. I grabbed a pen and started making lists. Things I knew, things I didn't know, things I still needed to find out. Patterns began to emerge, things I had never considered before, and I could feel a shift in my thinking. How had she been able to hide this from me? What did this money mean? I began analyzing the situation from every angle. My wife's motivations, her fear, the emotions she had masked so well. For all her deceit, there had been moments in our marriage where she'd been vulnerable. Her actions in the past hadn't been about financial independence, not entirely. They had been about control of a situation where she felt powerless. The more I thought about it, the more I understood that this was just the surface of something deeper, something that went beyond a simple betrayal. There were power dynamics at play in our marriage I had overlooked, and it was time to address them. As the hours passed, my thoughts became clearer, sharper. I wasn't going to make the same mistakes again. My first instinct had been to feel sorry for myself, to wallow in humiliation. But now, I saw this for what it was, an opportunity. I could stand here, drowning in bitterness, or I could rise above this. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about control. She had thought she could outsmart me, keep secrets, manipulate the situation in her favor. But I had something she didn't. I had experience. I had patience. I had time. With that realization, the edge of despair I had felt earlier began to fade, replaced by a quiet determination. I would handle this strategically. I wasn't going to rush into confrontation or make impulsive decisions based on hurt feelings. That's not who I was. I would approach this with calculated precision, learning everything I could, keeping my emotions in check, and then striking when the time was right. I closed the journal and placed it in my drawer, locking it away. But the plan inside my mind had already started to take shape. The first step: uncover everything I could about this hidden sum of money, where it came from, how she had managed to accumulate it, and most importantly, why. The second step: find out if there were other secrets, things she hadn't shared. No more blind trust. The path I was about to walk was one of knowledge, not ignorance. I would learn to see the cracks in her story, expose them one by one, and in the process, reclaim my life, my control, and my dignity. I stood up, looking out the window at the darkened sky. It was quiet now, but there was a storm brewing inside me, one that I couldn't ignore. I wasn't a victim anymore, and whatever came next, I would be ready for it. Days turned into weeks, and every conversation I had with my wife felt like a battlefield. She had tried to mend things, tried to explain herself. At first, I had listened, too tired, too hurt to push back. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized the far-reaching consequences of what had happened. This wasn't just about me or her. It was about everything we had built, everything I had believed in. The $30,000 was just the surface. The real issue was the power dynamic it represented. She had made decisions without me. She had taken control of our financial future without consulting me, without my input. And it was becoming increasingly clear that this wasn't a one-time mistake. This was part of a larger pattern of control, manipulation, and a lack of transparency. But I was done being passive. The betrayal had been personal, but the consequences were going to affect everything: the house, our savings, our plans for the future. We'd been working together for years to build a life, but she had been building something different, something secret. She'd kept a separate financial reserve, a hidden backup plan, just in case things went south. And as much as I hated to admit it, things had gone south. Our marriage, once a partnership, was now a game of survival, and I couldn't keep playing by the same rules. If I continued to let her operate in the shadows, I was allowing her to keep the upper hand. I could feel my resolve harden as I realized that the stakes were higher than I had originally thought. This wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a betrayal of everything I had worked for, of the life I thought we had built together. And now, there were new layers of complication to navigate. The more I dug into her financial habits, the more I uncovered. Small things, like how she had been sending money to her parents without telling me, under the guise of family support. How she had taken out loans in her name, loans I hadn't known about, loans that could affect both of us if things went sour. I had always trusted her to be honest with me about our finances, but now it was clear that I had been living in a house of cards. I started tracking her spending habits, digging through old receipts, and using her own logic against her. She didn't think I'd notice, but I had. Every lie, every omission was becoming clearer, and I began to see the full scope of what she had done and why. It was no longer just about the $30,000. It was about the fact that she had been preparing for a future without me in it, and I needed to understand the depth of her plans. The situation started to feel like a slow-motion crash. I wasn't the only one who had been holding secrets. She had been playing a game all along. But I wasn't powerless. Not anymore. I was beginning to realize the true extent of her manipulation, how deep it ran, and how easily she had swayed me over the years. My feelings of betrayal had turned into a calculated coldness, a necessity. I had to stay focused. I couldn't let emotions cloud my judgment. As I sat down and looked at the numbers she had hidden from me, I felt the pressure mount. I had been underestimating her for years. Now, I had to level the playing field. There was more to this than just her betrayal. The consequences of this discovery were now going to echo through every aspect of our lives. The house we had planned to buy, the investments we had talked about, none of that was as secure as I had thought. Our future together, the vision I had held in my mind, was beginning to unravel. I realized that if I didn't act now, if I didn't take back control of the situation, I would lose everything. And not just the money, my dignity, my self-respect, my ability to trust again. The more I analyzed our situation, the more I understood the full weight of what I was facing. I wasn't just fighting her. I was fighting a system of deception and lies. I was fighting against the way she had structured our lives to protect herself, without ever considering how that might affect me. And now I had to expose it, for both our sakes, even if it meant tearing everything down in the process. The stakes were no longer just personal. They were financial, emotional, and existential. The battle for control had begun. I started to make calls, consulting with lawyers about what my options were. I knew I couldn't just sit back anymore. There was too much at risk. As I spoke with financial experts, I realized the extent of the mess she had created. Loans I hadn't known about. Investments I didn't understand. Each revelation made my resolve stronger. I couldn't trust her anymore, and I wasn't going to walk into a future blindfolded. At the same time, I knew this wasn't going to be an easy fight. The more I pulled back the layers, the more I saw how much she had to lose. This wasn't just about money. It was about her sense of control, her autonomy. And now, she was going to have to face the consequences of what she'd done. But there was one thing I knew for sure now. I wasn't alone in this fight. I wasn't the naive partner she thought I was. I had the strength, the patience, and the knowledge to beat her at her own game. The stakes had escalated, but I was ready to play. I had been patient for far too long. The anger, the hurt, it had settled inside me, deep in my chest, where I had pushed it down, locked it away for the time being. But now, as I stood there in the dimly lit study, the plan was finally coming together. I knew what I had to do. The game had changed. The rules had changed. I would no longer allow myself to be the one who reacted. I was going to be the one who controlled the situation. I would set the pace, and I would make her see the price of her betrayal. My first move was to pull back. I stopped reacting to her attempts at reconciliation. She had tried so many times over the past few days to apologize, to explain herself. But every time she spoke, all I heard were half-truths, manipulations disguised as regret. I had learned to recognize her patterns, the subtle shifts in her tone when she wanted something, the carefully measured words when she was trying to twist the narrative in her favor. She couldn't fool me anymore. I had to build my case. For too long, I had let emotions cloud my judgment. This time, I was going to stay several steps ahead. It wasn't just about catching her in a lie. It was about understanding her fears, her motivations, and most importantly, the things she was still hiding. I had already done my homework. My lawyer, an old friend of mine, had been invaluable in outlining my options, making sure that when the time came, I was prepared for everything. I had started pulling financial documents, every bank statement, every loan agreement, every hidden account. It took time, but I was meticulous. Nothing would escape my attention. Every hidden dollar, every unreported expense, it would all come out. But more than the money, I needed to understand her true motivations. What drove her to keep this secret from me? Was it just about the money, or was there something deeper? I knew that if I wanted to beat her at her own game, I couldn't just rely on facts and figures. I needed to understand the woman I had married, what had changed in her, what had shifted in her heart, that made her think she could keep something like this from me. I started paying more attention to her behavior, her body language, the way she acted when I wasn't around. I noticed small things, the nervous glances when I asked about our finances, the little hesitations when she talked about her family, the occasional slip of the tongue. There was something buried deep within her that she was trying desperately to hide. I realized then that my advantage was knowledge, and I would use it to my full benefit. The more I knew about her, the more leverage I had. It wasn't about holding it over her head like a weapon. No, it was about giving me the ability to control the narrative, to steer the conversation in my favor when the time came. I wouldn't allow her to dictate the terms of this conflict anymore. I also needed to secure my own position. Our finances were tangled together in ways I hadn't fully understood until now, and I couldn't afford to leave myself exposed. I reached out to a financial advisor who specialized in asset protection. If she thought she could hide money from me, she hadn't seen anything yet. My investments, my savings, and my future would be locked down tight, protected, and secure. No more surprises. There was something else I had to do, something that would give me the final edge I needed. I needed to turn the situation around, to make sure that when everything came to light, it would be her who was scrambling for answers, not me. I started to reach out to people from her past, old friends, acquaintances from her work. I had no intention of turning into a detective, but I knew that when it came to these kinds of secrets, someone always knows something. And if I could piece together the full story, the full truth of who she really was, beyond the facade she'd carefully crafted, I would have everything I needed to take control of the narrative. Every piece of information I uncovered was another layer of her betrayal, another piece of the puzzle that, once completed, would expose everything. But I wasn't going to confront her just yet. That would come in time, but only when I was absolutely sure I had the upper hand. The most important part of this plan, I realized, was patience. I had been patient before, when I started building my businesses, when I fought for everything I had. But this time, patience wasn't just about surviving. It was about outlasting her. I wasn't going to be rushed. I wasn't going to be impulsive. I would move when the time was right, and when I did, it would be a calculated, precise strike. She was playing checkers. I was playing chess. I could feel the tension building within me. The desire for confrontation was there, but I knew better. Patience was my greatest weapon. I had set everything in motion. My financial security was in place. My lawyer knew the details. My strategy was laid out, and all that was left was to wait. Wait for her to make the wrong move. Wait for the moment when she thought she was safe, when she thought she had control. And when that moment came, I would be ready. The night was still, heavy with the weight of what was about to unfold. My heart beat harder in my chest, but my hands were steady. I had waited for this moment for weeks. No, months. Every conversation, every lie, every ounce of pain I had carried in silence led to this moment. I could hear her moving about the house, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. I stood by the living room window, looking out at the city, the lights twinkling far below. I had always loved this view, the same view I had shared with her countless times. But now, everything felt different. The life I had built with her, the future I had dreamed of, seemed so fragile, like it could crumble into dust at any second. And yet, I couldn't turn back now. There was no escaping the truth anymore. She entered the room, her usual smile faltering when she saw the look on my face. She didn't know yet. "Hey," she said softly, a touch of worry in her voice. "What's going on? You're scaring me." I could see the nervousness in her eyes. She knew something was off, but she didn't know what. She didn't know how close she was to losing everything. "Sit down," I said, my voice cold, controlled. "We need to talk." She hesitated for a moment, clearly sensing the shift in my demeanor. But she did as I asked, sinking into the couch across from me. Her eyes darted between me and the file on the coffee table that I had pushed toward her. "You've been hiding something from me," I began, my words deliberate, precise. "For a long time now." She froze, her breath catching in her throat. It was the first crack in her calm exterior. I could see the walls she had built around herself start to crumble, but she quickly recovered, her mask of innocence slipping back into place. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I opened the file, revealing the bank statements, loan records, and the list of hidden accounts I had discovered. The papers were spread out between us like a map of her betrayal, each piece of evidence like a knife in my heart. "I've spent the last few weeks looking into our finances," I said, watching her closely, "and I found $30,000 you've been hiding from me. Not just that, there are loans, transfers to your family, investments I never knew about. You've been lying to me." Her face turned pale. Her lips trembled, but she didn't speak. She wasn't ready to admit it yet. "You've been keeping this secret," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "while I've been here, trusting you, working with you. I thought we were partners. But you've been planning for a future that doesn't include me." She looked down at the papers, her hands shaking as she reached for them. The truth had hit her with the force of a freight train, and for the first time, I saw the cracks in her armor. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. You don't get to play the victim now, I said, my tone sharp. You don't get to lie your way out of this. Everything you've done, it's out in the open now, and you will answer for it. Tears welled in her eyes as she met my gaze, but I didn't flinch. The hurt I had felt for so long now transformed into something more powerful, a sense of justice. I was trying to protect us, she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't want to worry you. I didn't want to cause any more stress in our lives. The world's been so unpredictable lately. I thought I was helping us. Helping us. I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping me. You've been hiding everything from me. I've been out there, working for us, and you've been playing me for a fool. You think hiding money behind my back was helping us? That's not protection. That's betrayal. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said, her voice breaking. I never wanted to hurt you, but I didn't know how else to handle it. My fists clenched, my jaw tight as I fought to stay calm. I could feel the rage building inside me, but I knew that now wasn't the time for it to spill over. I had spent too much time preparing for this. This moment had to be about the truth, about holding her accountable. Everything you've done, I said slowly, has been a violation of the trust we built. But it's not just the money, is it? It's the lies, the constant manipulation, the way you thought you could control everything. You didn't trust me. You never did. She looked away then, her face crumpling with the weight of her guilt. The silence between us was deafening. This was it, the moment of reckoning. The dam had burst, and everything that had been hidden was now exposed. I could see her crumbling under the pressure, but I knew she wasn't ready to fully admit her mistakes. She wasn't ready to give up the power she had hidden behind her lies. But you'll learn, won't you? I said, my voice low and steady. You'll learn that I'm not the man you thought you could manipulate anymore. The game has changed. The words hung in the air like a verdict. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She closed her eyes, as if the weight of everything she had done was finally catching up to her. Her confession was silent, but it was clear. She knew she had lost control. She had underestimated me. She had underestimated how far I was willing to go to expose the truth. I'm sorry, she whispered, but I didn't hear the remorse I was hoping for. Instead, I heard the fear in her voice, the realization that everything she had built was falling apart. You will be, I said coldly, standing up and walking away, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions alone. The days following our confrontation felt surreal, as if the world had been turned upside down. My wife tried to reach out to me multiple times, her apologies laced with desperation. I ignored her calls, refused to meet her eyes when she passed me in the hallways. I was no longer interested in her explanations. She had already shown me who she truly was. In those quiet moments, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The pain, the frustration, those feelings had been replaced by something else. A quiet, steady certainty that I had done the right thing, that I was on the right path. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of power that had been missing from my life for far too long. I had always believed in second chances, but now I realized something important. I couldn't give her one. Not this time. This wasn't just a betrayal of me. It was a betrayal of everything we had built. A betrayal of the trust that, once broken, could never be fully repaired. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about me, taking back my life, my dignity, and my future. The final piece of the puzzle was laid out before me. My lawyer's office was waiting for the signal. The divorce papers were ready. But before I could sign them, I had one final move to make. I arranged to meet her in the same restaurant where we had celebrated our anniversary a year ago. She had insisted on this place, said it was our special spot. Back then, it felt like everything was still good, like we were partners. Now, it felt like the final act in a tragedy, a place where all the lies would be exposed once and for all. I arrived early, giving myself a few moments to calm my nerves. I wasn't angry anymore. What I felt now was resolve. It was over. The woman I had trusted with my life had kept secrets from me, manipulated me, and robbed me of the peace I deserved. She had destroyed our marriage long before I found out about the money. When she arrived, she was wearing the same dress she had worn on that anniversary night. It was a cruel reminder of how far we had fallen. She smiled faintly when she saw me, but there was no warmth in it. Only fear. I watched her as she sat down across from me. Her eyes were red. She hadn't been sleeping well. Guilt clung to her like a shroud. I know this isn't easy, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I've been thinking about everything we talked about. I understand now. I was wrong. I should have told you the truth. I should have trusted you. Can we? Can we work through this? The old me, the one who still held on to hope, might have considered it. But that man was gone now. The person sitting across from her now was someone different, someone who had learned the value of his own worth, someone who had seen beyond her lies. I pushed the divorce papers toward her, watching as her eyes flickered to the document, then back to me. She knew what it was before she even touched it. There's nothing to work through, I said, my voice calm, but firm. You had your chance. You've already made your decision. And now I'm making mine. She looked like she was about to say something else, but the words caught in her throat. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her face pale. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a deep, unsettling recognition that I wasn't going to back down. This wasn't a negotiation. There was no going back. I had seen this moment coming for weeks, even months. The emotional betrayal, the lies, and the manipulation had already done their damage. But what had hurt me more than anything was that I had been blind to who she truly was. And that blindness had allowed her to hurt me in ways I couldn't even begin to quantify. I had loved her deeply, and somewhere along the way, she had stopped being the woman I married. But today, I wasn't that man anymore. Today, I had the power, and I was taking it back. The restaurant had gone quiet around us. I could feel the weight of the moment, the finality of it all. No grand speeches, no dramatic outbursts, just a quiet decision that marked the end of a chapter. A chapter one had once thought would last forever. She signed the papers without a word. I'm sorry, she whispered again, her voice cracking. But I didn't respond. The apology was hollow. I had stopped needing it. As she stood to leave, I remained seated, watching her walk away. For a moment, I considered the man I had been, wondered if the man sitting here now was still the same person. But then I realized something. I had become someone stronger. I wasn't the person she had known. And, most importantly, I wasn't the person I had been. My phone buzzed on the table in front of me, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a message from my lawyer. The papers were filed. The process was final. I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for so long was finally gone. The pain would take time to heal, but I knew one thing with certainty. I would be okay. It wasn't just about moving on from her. It was about reclaiming the parts of myself I had lost. About rediscovering the man who had been buried under the weight of someone else's secrets. And in the end, I had won. Not just the battle against her lies, but the battle for my own freedom, for my own peace of mind. I had taken back control of my life.